Ladies and gentlemen, please stand. We want to acknowledge the official party, Lieutenant General Jamie Gerard, Major General Susie Verislam, Rona Adams, and Chaplain Pemberley. The U.S. Pacific Fleet and Vietnam Veterans of America, Chapter 858, are pleased you have joined us today in the National Vietnam War Veterans Day ceremony, where we honor all Vietnam War veterans and pay tribute to the Gold Star families. We wish to offer a special welcome to James and Carol Hickerson. James survived 6 years as a POW, and Carol served as an inspiration in her efforts with the national movement we know as the POW-MIA. We also welcome our distinguished guests from our civilian and military communities. Mayor Blangiardi, General David Bramlett, retired, Lieutenant General and Mrs. James Gerard, Major General, retired, and now President of the East-West Center, Susie Verislam, and her husband, Courtney. And a special welcome to our allies in Vietnam. New Zealand by Consul General Ketchen, Australia by Acting Consul General Grant, the Republic of Korea by Consul General Hong, and the Philippines by Deputy Consul General Bulos. And our guests of flag and general officers, command master chiefs, and command master sergeants. We are pleased that during our opening ceremony, there will be posting of the colors by the Joint Services Color Guard, our national anthem, Hawaii Pono'i, and the invocation followed by the retiring of the colors. Now, 2 centuries ago, for those of you not familiar with Hawaiian history, the last battle to unify Hawaii was fought a short distance from this location, just across the highway, with the loss of many warriors, and it lies in the shadow of very hallowed grounds. This cemetery was dedicated on Veterans Day, 1994, honoring all veterans. Hawaii's cultural traditions dictates that an oli be shared to seek the blessing of the ancients who guard our veterans and our heroes who never had the experience and the privilege of being a veteran, some having given their last full measure of devotion in Afghanistan and Iraq. We have pledged that we shall never forget our young warriors, Kyle Fernandez, Joshua Titcomb, Nainoa Ho, Louis Calapini, Kristen Marino, Antonio Bandanil, Steve Sakota, Eugene Kanakaoli, Jonathan Brostrom, and Radney Agno, who lie in peace in this very beautiful place. Nakoa o Mauna Ala honors our fallen warriors, our veterans, and attending with a traditional oli and a blessing on all gathered here.
Nakoa, huka ihe. Ala mala mala hele kanga kai una kayo ka o kaula ka o kare. Now you are the pua li pua ke pua kan puan mai kina kaulele kalan. O ta you o ke aka noia mai kai ki kua kai ki moi mai kai ki kapa kapo e kani. Ia makapula. Ia nai na we that wa. Ya no way. Tu e manue. Ke alua kunei kapule ia galau. Kulia galan yawi. Yanam, yanawe. Ane iluna kane lalo. Ka kau ka hema. Tu makani hai kalani. He kili ka kai kalani. Kauila nui make kalani. Pane i kalani ole ke kanaka. O mei taloia, ka ike, ka mana, ia e tahunu ai. O halauari, o ka iwai wai torea. Eli tau mai, a mama wanoi. Maia no I tau tuau. E ia maia, e maia, e ola noe. Hoi.
Mahalo nui na koa o mauna ala. Today's honors are to all of America's Vietnam War veterans, those here today, as well as those who did not return. Thus, all Vietnam War veterans, members of the armed forces, may render a military hand salute during the national anthem, whether in uniform or not. Color Sergeant, post the colors.
Color guard, let's stand to front. Forward. March. Reset. Arm.
U.S. Pacific Fleet Chaplain, Captain Paul Tremblay, will offer the invocation.
Let us pray. Almighty and eternal God, we pause to acknowledge your presence. As we come together on these sacred grounds to remember and honor the women and men who fought and sacrificed in service to our nation in Vietnam, I am reminded of the words recorded in James chapter 4. Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring, what your life will be. For you are like vapor that appears for a little while, then vanishes. Lord, this day, make us mindful and grateful for each day we are blessed to enjoy with our family, our friends, and our loved ones. For those who continue to mourn, comfort them with your love. For those who continue to wrestle with the consequences of combat, embrace them in your everlasting arms. And for those who stand in need of reassurance and relief, surround them with your peace. As it was for the generation we honor this morning, even now, there are thousands upon thousands of young Americans serving in defense of our nation, standing in the gap against the evil of our day. Lord, would you bless them and their families as they consecrate their lives to ensuring continued liberty for all America and her allies. And may our collective efforts contribute to a sustained, just, and lasting peace in our world. We offer this prayer in your most holy name. Amen.
Thank you, Chaplain. Color Sergeant, retire the colors.
March time. March. Right there. March. Forward. March.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. You may be seated. The president of the Vietnam Veterans of America, Hawaii Chapter 858, is Rona Adams. I'm sure we've all seen her. She served 2 tours in Vietnam as an Army nurse with the 44th Medical Brigade, which was assigned to the 3rd Field Hospital in Saigon and the 8th Field Hospital in Nha Trang. Rona truly has been the engine behind today's ceremony. Please give her a warm welcome. President Rona Adams.
Thank you, Alan. Aloha and welcome, fellow veterans, Vietnam veterans, Gold Star family members, and guests. I am honored to welcome you on behalf of the Vietnam Veterans of America, Chapter 858. Today, we commemorate the National Vietnam War Veterans Day in tribute to the service in uniform of the nearly 3+ million military men and women who served in country. During that time, we all remember as the Vietnam War. The Master of Ceremonies for today is Alan Ho, a Vietnam combat medic, a Gold Star father whose son, Noah, is interned in the most beautiful place down there. We hope our program will be a memorial one for each one of you. And this isn't scripted, but I have something to say. You know that I was a nurse in Vietnam. And I want to tell you, if it wasn't for the medics, the combat medics like Alan and others that are sitting in the office in the under the leaky tents, and the Navy corpsmen, if it wasn't for you people, that you got them to us so we could save them. So thank you. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Rona. On March 8, 1965, the ground war began when 3,500 United States Marines landed at the beach at Chu Lai. By Christmas that year, nearly 200,000 soldiers, Marines, and sailors were in country. At the war's end on April 30th, 1975, nearly 3 million Americans had been on the ground, in the air, and on the rivers and seas in Vietnam. 7,484 women served in country, of which 83.5% were nurses. And more than 58,000 of America's finest lost their lives, with over 1,600 who remain missing in action. Yet 97% of Vietnam War veterans were honorably discharged. 90% of those who experienced heavy combat are proud to have served, and 74% say they would serve again, even knowing the outcome. We are a special bunch. We take special pride in this opportunity to thank and honor veterans of the Vietnam War, especially our POW and MIA, for their service and sacrifice on behalf of the United States, and to thank and honor the families of these veterans. I would like to invite all the Vietnam War veterans in the audience to please stand and be recognized. Welcome home, veterans. I'm sure it's safe to say that 50 plus years ago, few of us would have believed we would be here today. Whatever the circumstances, we never lost faith, but there were times when it seemed like an impossible dream. We survived, and today we are here to proudly claim our title as a Vietnam War veteran. We made promises to each other that we would always stay in touch back in the world. Yet fate and the reality of war cruelly reminds us of two basic rules. Rule number one, combat kills. Rule number two, you cannot change rule number one. Far too many of our buddies were denied the honor to become a veteran. That is a sad but very real fact of life. 300 plus of boys' families were denied a fulfilling life after Vietnam as a veteran. Though many years have passed, those of us who were lucky to survive have never wavered in our promise and never forget. Thus today we will pause to honor some of the fallen by recognizing the surviving members of a few of their families and personal friends. Staff Sergeant Howard J. Amdua. Brother Allen, would you please stand? Howard was a career NCO who served as a heavy weapons team leader in the 1st Platoon, Bravo Company, 2nd Battalion, 14th Infantry, Golden Dragons of the 25th Infantry. I grew up with his brothers and sisters, and on July 7, 1966, his tragic loss on a jungle trail in Binh Dong Province, Cu Chi, sent a shockwave of reality in our community. You know, I knew little of Vietnam, let alone the war, yet within a year it became part of my reality of life. Howard was one of my personal heroes as a teenager. Thank you, Howard. Will the family of Specialist 4th Class Leonard Valdemir Castillo please stand? We are so honored that all of you have come today. Thank you so much. We welcome his sister, Charlotte Barra, and her husband, Herbert, Chad Barra, Leo Castillo, brother Transon Castillo, nephew Danielle Dorazio, niece, Carol Boyconsejo, sister, Don Boyconsejo, brother-in-law, Cara Egloria, sister, Donovan Egloria, brother-in-law, Caldon Boyconsejo, nephew, Elsie Boyconsejo, niece, and Captain Calderon Boyconsejo, grandnephew, and Christina Boyconsejo, grandniece. Thank you so much. Leonard served In Charlie Company, 3rd Battalion, 187th Infantry, the 101st Airborne Division, the Screaming Eagles, as we recall. He was in the northern sector of South Vietnam, Trois Tien Province. The 187th Infantry were also known as the Rakkasans, who also fought in the Battle of Hamburger Hill. And at the end of the Vietnam War, they were the most highly decorated airborne battalion in the Army. You know, a note left in Leo's memory was penned by his cousin, Ronnie Reynolds, who stated, "I was so very proud and honored to call you cousin. I cherish all the small kid time spent together so very much. Thank you for blessing our lives." Thank you, Castillos. And then Sergeant Melvin Fujita, although his sister and sister-in-laws were scheduled to come today, they had an emergency and couldn't make it. But I will share this about their brother Melvin, who served with Delta Company, 5th Battalion, 46th Infantry, AmeriCal Infantry Division in the northern sector of South Vietnam, known as I Corps. He served with an infantry regiment which was assigned to one of the most hotly contested areas during the Vietnam War. I know that for a fact because that's where I served. And then Staff Sergeant Ernest Seiichi Sakai. We welcome his aunt Chieko Tonai, Aunt Loretta Siwaki, and cousin Dennis Nakashima. Please stand. Born in Hawi on the Big Island, he was a career infantry NCO. Ernest was assigned to Alpha Company, 2nd Battalion, 1st Infantry, 196th Light Infantry Brigade, AmeriCal Division. He was in my battalion. I was assigned to the Long Range Recon Platoon in Ernie's battalion. In combat, you quickly come to hear about all the other Hawaii guys in the same unit. We knew each other long before actually meeting. Our first meeting occurred on the Jungle Trail when my team linked up with his rifle company. "Hey, you must be Staff Sergeant Sakai. How's it?" Perhaps no more than a half a dozen times we linked up in a 3-month period. Yet today it seems like I've known him all my life. Perhaps he was an incredible soldier selected by the company commander to be the company's first sergeant. He was well liked by the men, a highly skilled infantry warrior. Ernie wasn't very tall, yet he carried the Remington 12-gauge shotgun, which was almost as long as he was tall. In July of 1968, while on patrol, one of his men tripped the booby trap. A grenade wired to a tree did not immediately explode, and Ernie immediately took charge, secured the soldier, making sure he would not move, and triggered the grenade. After the soldier was safe, Ernie proceeded to disarm the device, but unfortunately it exploded, and he was mortally wounded. It was a very sad day for all of us who served in combat with him. All of us here humbly say mahalo nui to each of you and your families for the service of your loved one who stepped forward when our nation called them all those many years ago. We encourage you to celebrate their lives and to remember that we who knew them, however briefly, will never forget. We have pledged to say their names, and thus they will live in our memories forever. Now, if anyone missed the significance of the month of March, we celebrate it because it is Women's History Month. Congress adopted Public Law 100-9 to celebrate the contributions made by women to recognize their achievements that they have made over the course of American history. In honor of Women's History Month, we are blessed that our guest speaker epitomizes the best role of a historic Wahine. She is the daughter of one of our very own, a Vietnam War veteran, a career NCO in the Army who set a great example for his daughter to be all that she could be. Sergeant First Class Adelino Conrad Barris. I think she has pretty much accomplished it, but it would not surprise me if your little girl Susie Major General, retired, and now president of the East West Center, has not reached her full potential. Susie, Major General, President, ma'am, it is an honor to be in your presence. Please come share some of your wisdom with us this morning.
Mahalo nui, Alan. I am honored to be in your presence today. Aloha mai kako, Mayor Blangiardi, General Retired Bramlett, Lieutenant General Mrs. Gerard, Consul General from our allied nations, our POW MIA families and survivors, as well as our Gold Star families, as well as our Vietnam Veterans of America Council, distinguished guests, fellow flag officers, community leaders, family, friends, and of course, our honored veterans today, our Vietnam veterans. What an honor it is to address you all today on Vietnam Veterans Day, March 29th. On this day, we commemorate the hardships suffered and sacrifices made by millions of Americans as well as our allies during the Vietnam War. This day does not only honor veterans, but also our families, as we just saw, who supported them before and after the war. So it is an honor to see you here today. You know, I'm humbled to address you this morning, and I feel wholly unqualified. In this hallowed place that pays special tributes to Americans who served our country during the Vietnam War, and to honor the over 58,000 U.S. troops memorialized on the Vietnam Veterans Wall that has come to Hawaii, as well as to honor the troops from over 40 nations who provided assistance, which includes the Republic of Korea, Australia, New Zealand, Philippines, to name a few. Their contributions are significant, and they remain our strong allies today. You know, it's hard to recount and distill the span of decades into just a few sentences, and when I look at the faces of each and every one of you in this audience, I think of the many, many stories that you have, the stories that you remember, and maybe some of the stories that you don't want to remember. But you do, and you come because of your sense of duty to those who did not return and to those who had suffered much. You know, this is the first Vietnam tribute that I've attended since my dad, Sergeant First Class retired Adelino Vares from Paia, Maui, then a Vietnam veteran. He was a specialist then. You know, he passed over 2 years ago, and now he sits at rest right here around the corner. You know, he'd attend these events out of a sense of duty like you, to remember those he had served with, and like many veterans, just to be in the presence of other veterans who had served, who understood without speaking, because it's in the eyes, it's in the nod, it's the way in which we look at each other, and we just know. We don't have to say. You know, that's something only a Vietnam veteran can fully understand. You know, thank you, Alan Ho, for inviting me to speak at this event, knowing my father's service. And I also want to thank General Bramlett for often sharing his story of his Vietnam experiences at so many events, and always inspiring. And I can assure you that I didn't lift any lines from your previous speeches. And I want to thank all of the veterans of Hawaii, as well as Rona Adams, who always asked my dad to join in on wreath-laying events, making sure that he was included. And to the many veterans here, like Tom Sterling, who would invite my dad to the Christmas events, Ed Cruikshank, who ensured that while my dad was in the hospital on his last days, was able to show him the virtual Vietnam Veterans ceremony during COVID. And he watched this entire hour of this ceremony. And he listened to, back then, Lieutenant General Gerard, but when he was Major General Gerard, 25th ID commander. And he interacted, and I told General Gerard this story, but he interacted with him on this screen that I held there for an hour, because I didn't want to move it. I wanted my dad to see it. And as General Gerard was talking about 25th ID's activities and actions moving towards Cu Chi, my dad said it before he said it. I will never forget that. He goes, 25th ID, Cu Chi. And at that moment, I looked at my dad, and as each veteran in this virtual space was rendering a salute, my dad with IVs and tubes in his arm, with bandage, laying back on that hospital bed, each time rendered a salute, each time did it and sharply moved it back down. And I did everything at that moment to hold and suck in every tear, because I knew he was doing it to connect, even in that virtual space, with a band of brothers and sisters, not just Vietnam, but throughout all of our veterans and those who serve today. You know, that was the last event he saw physically, but I know he's here in spirit. You know, I spoke at the 50th commemoration of the Vietnam War in 2016, and then I felt wholly still unqualified to speak. But I decided to share something that I'd like to share with you very quickly. In 2016, I shared a story that's etched in my mind. You know, when I was in elementary school in the 70s, I remember finding this newfound friend. And I went into their home in Wahiawa, and I saw a picture of this handsome young local boy who looked like about 19 years old. And over this frame was a silk lei, you know, the kind that you see at Kamehameha School's graduation. And next to it was flanked flowers and a lit candle. And my friend noticed my eyes fixed on that frame. And she said, "That's my older brother. He died in the war." And that was it. I intuitively knew at that young age that it was because of the Vietnam War, as the images were all over our black and white 3-station television screen with unprecedented, uncensored, raw coverage of the Vietnam War. And although my dad had served in Nha Trang, Vietnam between 1965 and 66, where we started to see a large number of troops in Vietnam assigned to the Military Assistance Command in Vietnam, where he was assigned to the Army Map Service topographic team, his stories were really basically fact. He said he produced and delivered classified maps and overlays from locations from the MACV headquarters as far as Saigon. I never really knew what that meant. That's all about my dad told me. Even when I was deployed to Iraq in 2005 and 6 during the height of the indirect fire and IED roadside bombs in Iraq before the surge, I would tell my dad when I called Hawaii about us being mortared about 4 times a week. And I'd call in to the Hickam switch, by the way, which was the same Hickam switch that they still called during the Vietnam period. Then he began to tell me about the first time the perimeter defenses were breached and the enemy had infiltrated and blew up the latrine. The first time that he'd been directly attacked by the enemy, and of course motivated them to ensure that no seams in the base defense, that they didn't have to worry about volunteers for sandbag duty. He said he would go out to Saigon with only a sidearm and minimum escort vehicles on the road. During those early days are unimaginable today. You know, I felt like why he was telling me those stories then is because he was telling me the stories of vulnerabilities and weaknesses to ensure that we could learn from them, that I could learn from them. You know, while we connect with our stories, there is a theme that is drastically different. Another reflection of a lesson that we can learn from our Vietnam veterans. Learn as a society that soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines should never be the target of scorn by its own people because of political decisions outside of their control. You know, I asked him when he came home what it was like, and he said there was the bad vibe in his perfect pidgin English. When they came home, you know, Vietnam veterans, there was no applause at the airport, no welcome ceremony, no parade. There was no proper recognition initially of those who paid the ultimate sacrifice. And I want to share this contrast when I went on R&R, and many of you in the audience can relate, in 2005 from Iraq to Hawaii in a stopover in Dallas on the Freedom flight, which would land with an arc of water, like a rainbow, from 2 fire trucks on the runway. Daily, there were lines of people to greet troops with cold water, goodie bags, smiles, among them Boys and Girl Scouts, community volunteers, but among them were men about my dad's age, with the warmest and sincere voices. "Welcome home, soldier." And as my eyes moved from their eyes to their hats, I'd see those words, "Vietnam veteran." And I'd say, "Thank you for your support." And one veteran told me, "I want to be sure that you receive the welcome and thanks that we didn't." And that stuck with me. It was clear at that moment that although it had been years since the end of the Vietnam War, the memories of the chilling homecoming and those they lost remain with our veterans. You know, as you heard Alan, you know, the Vietnam War impacted every corner of the nation and the world, as we can see by our allies. Hawaii's at the crossroad of the Pacific, was a special R&R location. We were not exempt, however, by facing those mobilizations. There were many who served in all branches, the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, including the Nurse Corps. And what many don't realize is that on May 13th, 1968, the Hawaii National Guard's 29th Infantry Brigade, including the 10442 Infantry Battalion Army Reserve that was attached to the 29th, was called to active duty. It was only one of 4 National Guard units at the time during the Vietnam War to be called up to duty. They showed up when they were called. Even though they were not deployed as a unit, they were separate augmentees. You know, today there's a Pohaku, or rock, that sits at the 29th Infantry Brigade headquarters. And it has, coincidentally or not, 29 names from the 29th Infantry who are fallen. And now there's another rock next to it, like Alan mentioned, of the fallen of the 20 years of persistent conflict in Iraq and Afghanistan. And those are just one example. I was going to talk about the 25th, but I know we have Lieutenant General Gerard to share a little bit more about this. You know, coincidentally, on next week, Friday, will play golf at the University of Hawaii ROTC golf tournament. What's special about this is not the fact that I'm playing golf, but the fact that this is for the fallen warriors over the 100-year history of the UHROTC. And I share this because there are many Vietnam veterans who are fallen. And what's special about our veterans teaching the next generation is that in every hole when you tee off, there are young cadets standing by each hole to tell you a story about a fallen warrior. And among them are the names like Second Lieutenant Frank Rodriguez, local boy, graduated from Radford High School, died in 1968 on a recon mission while assigned to Alpha Company, 1st Battalion, 501st Infantry, 101st Airborne. It was said that he was a well-respected leader of his platoon, a fine soldier who died in an assault on an enemy force in North Vietnam. And one of his brothers in arms said, "We were young, we were tired, and we were responsible." And this message comes from a voice of a young cadet who was born in the late 1990s or 2000s. They carry these signs, they look at the pictures, they relay the stories of the fallen, they remember the service and sacrifice. And what amazes me about these young cadets is that they still raise their hands to serve, like the many young sailors, soldiers, airmen, Marines you see here today. They are inspired by these stories. They are inspired by you. You know, when I was a young cadet, I thought about those stories, and one nurse, Army nurse I interviewed, it was around 1987, before I became a lieutenant. She told me she recruited Sharon Ann Lane into the Army Nurse Corps, and always felt a heavy heart when she remembered her, as she was the first U.S. Army nurse to be killed as a result of direct enemy fire in Vietnam. She was later awarded the Bronze Star for her heroism in 1969. But then I didn't really know that story. I learned a lot more about those heroics, about U.S. Army nurses like Rona Adams, who had volunteered and put their lives on the line to save lives, to see the most gruesome injuries, and treated trauma, not just physically, but emotionally. So as we reflect on this day today, designated to honor our Vietnam veterans, may we not forget to be grateful for the relative peace we enjoy today because of the service and sacrifice. You know, my current role as the president of the East-West Center, whose mission is to promote relations among people and nations of the United States, Asia, and the Pacific, understanding the cost of war and the service and sacrifice of the service members, veterans, and fallens and the families who have come with visible and invisible scars. I know that I must, and we must, do everything in our power to prevent war, crisis, and conflict by using all instruments of national power. It is the understanding of peace through strength and readiness to ensure we deter conflict in the future, and the effective investment in our next generation of leaders. It is also the acknowledgement of our allies and partners who have stood by our side during Vietnam and stand with us today. So today, it's time for us to remember our Vietnam veterans. We honor the memory of those who bravely and faithfully served. To all of our Vietnam veterans, welcome home. Thank you for your continued service so that generations to come will not forget. I know I won't. And as one vet said, we were young, we were tired, and we were responsible. And that tells me we never quit, even when it seems impossible, because impossible is an opinion. We all have a responsibility or kuleana to serve our family, community, and nation and world. God bless you, your families, our precious Hawaii, our nation, and our world. Mahalo piha and aloha.
Awesome. Such inspiring words. Thank you, Susan. It is an honor for me to introduce Lieutenant General James B. Gerard as our keynote speaker. He is a dear personal friend. And you know, it isn't a bad thing to be friends with a general. But seriously, veterans here will understand this. His Army career started as an enlisted soldier, and he earned his infantry blue cord at Fort Benning. Jamie, as he is frequently called, has called Hawaii home in a number of assignments, including with the Wolfhounds, 227 Infantry Regiment, Schofield Barracks, and as the commanding general of the 25th Infantry Division. He is now currently the deputy commander of the U.S. Army Pacific Command at Fort Shafter. Sir, welcome.
Mahalo, Alan. Thank you very much. And aloha, everyone. When Alan asked me to do this, he did not tell me that I would have to follow Susie in my remarks. He's pretty sneaky. Today, I can't say a whole lot of bad things about him, and I will refer to him in my remarks. But I would ask everybody to please join me in a round of applause as we recognize our Vietnam veterans, our Gold Star families. Thank you very much. Mayor and Consuls General, General Bramlett, fellow flag officers, thank you very much for being here today. As we participate in this solemn ceremony, it is very easy to recognize that some could have used the weather to keep us away, but I do appreciate you being here. It is an honor, and it's very humbling to stand here with you as we gather to remember those who served, those who fought, and those who died in service to our nation in Vietnam. It's important that we take this time to reflect and to hone our skills to remember honorably. Today, over on the Big Island, the West Hawaii Veterans Cemetery is dedicating a new memorial to those who lost their lives and to surviving veterans of the Vietnam War. Constructed by Mason Billy Fields, a Marine in the Vietnam War, the memorial bears a brass plaque with the words, Kukoi Ika Makani Makaha, which means to stand bravely in the fierce winds. Today is an opportunity to thank all of our Vietnam veterans who continue to stand bravely in fierce winds. This month marks the 58th anniversary of 3,500 Marines who deployed to South Vietnam in 1965, a number that would grow to nearly 3 million soldiers, Marines, sailors, and airmen who served in the air, on the ground, and waterways in the decade that followed. Today, to the day, marks the 50th anniversary of the last U.S. combat troops leaving Vietnam. And we didn't fight alone. Alongside our South Vietnamese allies, we fought as a coalition that included nearly 400,000 troops sent by South Korea, Australia, Thailand, New Zealand, and the Philippines. Among them, the state of Hawaii, the units that call Hawaii home, and our rich community of veterans share a profound legacy of standing bravely in the fierce wind. The 25th Infantry Division, Hawaii's Army Division, one among so many units, served over 1,700 days in combat in Vietnam and Cambodia from 1965 to 1971. and 21 members from Tropic Lightning were awarded Medals of Honor for their acts of valor. Each veteran had the story. So many exemplified uncommon courage that yielded remarkable sacrifices. And the telling of those stories isn't over. Last summer, President Biden belatedly awarded the Medal of Honor to Staff Sergeant Edward Kaneshiro and Specialist 5 Dennis Fujii, 2 soldiers from Hawaii who fought in the Vietnam War. As an infantry squad leader, Staff Sergeant Kaneshiro saved his platoon with rifle fire and grenades when they came under attack in the Kim Song Valley in December 1966, before eventually succumbing to his wounds. Specialist Fuji was aboard a helicopter ambulance as a crew chief on a rescue mission to evacuate wounded Vietnamese soldiers when his helicopter took enemy fire and crash landed at landing zone Ranger North. Though injured, he waved off a rescue, remaining behind alone, and over the next 17 hours, he cared for the wounded Vietnamese soldiers he had come to evacuate and put himself in the line of hostile fire in order to direct airstrikes against the enemy until he was eventually recovered. Vietnam reminds us that war is the most solemn undertaking, and its cost is profound. More than 1 million Vietnamese, military and civilian, died during the war. Of those sent by South Korea, Australia, Thailand, New Zealand, and the Philippines, more than 5,000 lost their lives. And here at home, so many bear scars, both visible and not, of the conflict. 1,600 remain missing in action, and the names of 58,000 U.S. service members are inscribed on the memorial in Washington, D.C. Many of them are buried here, or among the thousands at Punch Bowl, alongside Medal of Honor recipients Sergeant First Class Rodney Yano and Corporal Larry Maxson. In Mililani, you can visit the grave of Corporal Terry Kawamura, who served as a member of the 173rd Engineer Company of the 173rd Airborne Brigade. When the quarters he shared with his teammates came under attack, Corporal Kawamura threw himself onto an explosive charge the enemy had thrown into the room, giving his life to protect his teammates. Each of these stories in some way reflects the stories each veteran and each family here today holds. Stories of service that required sacrifice. Sacrifice born of uncommon courage that resulted in uncommon valor and demonstrated a higher commitment to duty, to country, and to one another. Reflecting on what that service and those sacrifices mean to each of us, we honor our veterans and families. The Vietnam conflict shaped each of us. For me, Vietnam veterans molded me, along with my entire generation. As Susie talked about her father, my father as well was a soldier and served in Vietnam. He was an armor officer, but he actually commanded an infantry company in Vietnam. Most of his ROTC classmates from North Georgia College served in Vietnam. And when I attended North Georgia College years later, numerous friends had fathers that served in Vietnam. And some of those lost their fathers in Vietnam. Our ROTC leadership, both officers and NCOs, were largely comprised of Vietnam veterans. And as a young soldier in the National Guard, in my initial training at Fort Benning and at Ranger School, and then my first platoon sergeant, Sergeant First Class Airborne Ferguson. So many of these non-commissioned officers were Vietnam veterans, and they brought a sense of intensity, of realism, of a true understanding and explanation of risk to our training that non-Vietnam veterans just didn't have. It was powerful. When they spoke, you listened. It left an impression. And it raised the significance of tough, realistic training that has impacted me and how I have sought to serve and lead since my early days. As General Milley said at this podium last year over at the Punch Bowl, we are your legacy. And this community of selfless servants continue to lead by their continued example to serve. See Specialist Fuji, who I mentioned earlier, after a harrowing 4-day recovery that incredibly involved another helicopter landing, downed helicopter, and another crash landing, came home to Hawaii and joined the Hawaii National Guard and Pacific Army Reserve, just as so many of you did. In 2015, I met another Medal of Honor recipient who served in Daltine as a company commander in the 25th Infantry Division, 227 Infantry Wolfhounds. Lieutenant General retired Foley at the time was continuing to serve. At that time, he was the president of the Army Emergency Relief Fund, the Army's only nonprofit that provides emergency assistance, grants, and scholarships to thousands of military families in need each year. He also continues to mentor senior Wolfhound leaders to this day. There are other general officers, too many to mention all by name, that have influenced me throughout my career, even my recent career. Lieutenant General David Grange, Major General Eldon Bargewell, and our own General David Bramlett, all embodied service over self. And a beloved member and pillar of this community, Alan Ho and his family, have given so much. I only got to know Alan a few years ago, but he has definitely enriched my life, and he continues to enrich the lives of my family and this community, and I am profoundly grateful for our relationship. I think this theme of continued commitment to service bears a special weight today, one that signals your call to service is far from over. In August 2021, the global war on terrorism is ended. With its end, a new generation of soldiers, veterans, and families are searching to make sense of the losses, the sacrifices sustained, and conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan that ended with the question of victory unresolved. I think your role as our Vietnam veterans becomes more significant with the end of the global war on terrorism. See, you once helped our nation learn a painful lesson. As President Reagan put it, to respect those who serve the nation and never again to confuse the warrior and the war. And we are stronger today because of it. Yet a new generation needs you. Our religions, our myths, our history, from King David to King Arthur to King Kamehameha, all echo a painful but essential evolution from youth to maturity, from warrior to leader. But the warrior never makes that transition alone. They require mentorship as they pass through the crucible from youth to experience to wisdom. They need those who have walked that same road, fought that fight, and made sense of that experience and their place in the world. I'm reminded that we as humans can't see the big picture of the divine, of what this all means. Instead, I think we take meaning from the principles and ideals we believe in, the nation we defend, the people we love, the world we want this one to become. We're old enough to know that there will always be challenges and there will always be doubts. But the most precious, the most sacred bonds we share are cemented in our commitment to community, to country, to family, and to the men and women we serve alongside. So just as my generation in uniform is passing the mantle of warrior to the next, so too are you, our Vietnam veterans and families, in a position to help our young veteran families bring deeper meaning to their lives as they undertake the transformative journey from warrior to leaders and valued members of their communities. I suppose in closing, I'm struck by how the Vietnam War is woven into the fabric of history that brings us where we are today. It's not lost on me that the United States began by supporting our ally, South Vietnam, in its struggle against the expansion of the Communist North, the People's Republic of China, and the USSR. We fought alongside allies, Australia, New Zealand, the Republic of Korea, the Philippines, and Thailand, to uphold the promise of democracy. Yet, Vietnam wasn't the only country that struggled in the region. The conflict had a profound impact across Southeast Asia, especially in Laos and Cambodia. That was 60 years ago. And yet, while much has changed, much has stayed the same. Once again, China and Russia stand together on the world stage. President Xi's authoritarian rule in China and aggressive action in Southeast Asia, in Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar are undermining regional stability. In this, there is still so much to learn from your experience in Vietnam to deter another conflict, and it's not a charge we take lightly. Our world still requires those who would not stand idly by and allow evil to flourish. Your legacy, your legacy, your legacy stands ready to meet those challenges. In March 1970, pilot Captain Michael O'Donnell was flying a mission to extract a reconnaissance patrol in Cambodia. There was an explosion. His aircraft crashed, and he was presumed dead but was listed as missing. His remains were identified in 2001, some 31 years later. Major O'Donnell's probably most well-known for words he penned shortly before his death, words that are inscribed on California's Vietnam Memorial in Sacramento. He wrote, "Take what they have left and what they have taught you with their dying, and keep it with your own. And in that moment when men decide and feel safe to call war insane, take one moment to embrace those gentle heroes you left behind." As soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, you answered the call. You did your duty, and we are grateful for all you have done and continue to do in service to the nation. We keep those close in hearts whose final resting place we still do not know, and the families who carry the burden of loved ones lost. We celebrate their lives, their courage, and their sacrifices. Those who knew them will never forget. Mahalo nui to each of you for all you have done to stand bravely in the fierce winds, defending our liberty and our values. May God continue to bless you, and may God continue to bless America. Thank you.
Thank you, General Gerard. All right, at this time, those who are going to participate in the wreath laying, please link up with your wreath over in the back there. Wreaths are being presented by each branch of the military, dignitaries, veteran service organization, and Vietnam War veterans in memory and honor as a symbol that we shall never forget. Our own Tom Sterling, who served with the 4th Infantry Division in Vietnam, will officiate the wreath presentation protocol.
Thank you, Ellen. Thank you, General Gerard, General Darussalam. Representing United States Army Pacific, Lieutenant General James Gerard. Representing United States Pacific Fleet, Rear Admiral Christopher Kavanaugh. Representing the city and county of Honolulu, Mayor Rick Blangiardi. Representing the New Zealand Consul General's Office, Mr. Mike Ketchum. Representing the Republic of Korea Consul General, Mr. Suk-un Hong. Representing the Australia Acting Consul General, Mr. Alexander Grant. Representing the Consul General of the Philippines, Mrs. Grace Ann Bulos. Representing the Coast Guard District 14, Rear Admiral Mike Day. Representing the VA Pacific Islands Healthcare Systems, Vice Admiral Retired Adam Robinson. Representing the VA Honolulu Regional Office, Ms. Stacy Bennett. Representing Vietnam Veterans of America, Oahu, Chapter 858, Mr. Dickey Shimoko and Mr. Woody Woods. Representing Delta Company, 1st Battalion, 7th Regiment, 1st Marine Division, Sergeant Caroline Ard. Representing the Honolulu Council of the Navy League Honolulu, President Mr. Jack Shriver, and Executive Director Jane Ferrari. Representing VFW Department, Mr. Ron Shadle. Representing VFW Post 10276, Mr. Stan Fernandez. Representing the Oahu Veterans Center, Ms. Claire Levinson. Representing American Legion, Mr. Fran Riddell. Representing Knights of Columbus, State of Hawaii, Colonel Retired Lawrence Gonzalez. Representing VFW State Auxiliary, Ms. Anita Luando Acogido. Representing VFW 10150, Lyle Oppo. And last but certainly not least, 728th MP Battalion, represented by Sergeant First Class Reynolds and Second Lieutenant Abreu.
Mahalo. All right, at this time, please stand for honor and the playing of taps, which will be followed by the release of the doves provided by the Gold Star family of Staff Sergeant Ernest Sakai. This concludes today's official National Vietnam War Veterans Day ceremony. Your attendance is a tribute to all Vietnam War veterans, and we thank you for being here. We invite each of our Vietnam War veterans to share your stories and to rekindle old friendships. Mahalo nui for your attendance. God bless you and your family. God bless our servicemen and women, and God bless America.